All right, what's going on, y'all? So welcome to another episode of Full Circle Podcast. It is your favorite brother, Joseph, as always. Oh, man, so much has been going on in the news. I know we talk about this all the time over the weekend, and I think pretty much since last Wednesday, people thought Donald Trump was dead. Obviously, from today, we know he's not because he showed up at a press conference yesterday and, of course, was in a cabinet meeting that was televised to essentially announce the moving of the space headquarters for Space Force from Colorado to Alabama. We'll talk a little bit about that. Also, a federal judge today struck down Trump's order to deport people that are here illegally in the country or that are undocumented to Venezuela. So we'll talk a little bit about what happened with that is concerned and some of the details, give you a little bit of a picture of what the Alien Enemies Act that Donald Trump has been utilizing, what it was originally meant for, and what the purpose is supposed to be. And then we will also talk today about Harvard getting a federal funding order from a judge to restore the $2.6 billion in funding, as well as discuss the declaration of tariffs being illegal, some of Trump's tariffs being illegal, as well as the Epstein documents, some of them that were released today, and, of course, the women that were speaking out on Capitol Hill. Before I get into all of that, yes, that was a doozy of an intro. But before I get into all that, really quickly, I just want to say, as I always do, thank you so much for subscribing, for watching, for engaging, and of course, commenting. I always appreciate that. If you've been watching this podcast and you haven't done any of those things, or maybe you've done one or the other or a couple, listen, what are you even thinking about? What are you doing? Hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, and go ahead and leave a comment. Let us know what you think. You can go ahead and follow us on Spotify, here on YouTube, and of course, you can also do so on Instagram and TikTok @_Full Circle Pod on Instagram and @Full Circle Pod on TikTok. As I always say, it's free to support a nigga unless you want to do more, and I appreciate when you do. Okay, so we're going to dive right into the main topic today. Of course, as I mentioned previously, today, or at least earlier this week, Donald Trump was told by a federal judge that he is no longer allowed to deport Venezuelan undocumented immigrants or deport anybody that's undocumented using the Alien Enemies Act. So the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that it only applies during actual declared wars, which you need congressional approval to do so. And that, of course, it would just be so loosely interpreted to apply to immigration crackdowns. Now, just to give you a little bit of the context of what the law is, so you kind of understand what that was used for. This law was formed back in 1798, and it was passed during the quasi-war with France as part of the Alien and Sedition Acts. Now, the reason why this was passed after the American Revolution is because of the fact that the Federalists, who George Washington was one of them, feared French spies, radicals, and immigrants that were sympathetic to Thomas Jefferson's party. And the issue with this was they were not sure because of the tension and the newness of the country. Of course, they were trying to avoid the destruction of the creation of the Union. And of course, Thomas Jefferson was very, very popular among the French, especially in the French government. So to give this a little bit of context, this law gave presidents the unilateral power to detain, deport, or restrict nationals of enemy countries during war. So the historic use of this, we can just kind of use a couple of examples where this has occurred. The War of 1812, when British nationals were monitored, of course, because there were still people that were loyalists at the time, which even led to the War of 1812. And they were basically trying to find out who was on the side of the new and young country and who would be on the side of the British Empire, who once again, after losing a war, went ahead and reasserted their dominance or attempted to reassert their dominance in the American government. And the reason why I've talked about this the War of 1812. I've mentioned this to you before because just like this is a significant piece of legislation, we always talk about the fact that the last time that our country was invaded and the last time that our capital was threatened was during the War of 1812. We only see this pop up in recent history during the January 6, 2021 insurrection at the Capitol. And a lot of people say, well, Donald Trump, he didn't incite the insurrection. But the question then becomes, if he didn't incite the insurrection, maybe he could have stood on that, as being a legal form of defense. But then why pardon all the January 6 rioters if you think that their actions were violent and defamatory and not part of what the MAGA movement is all about? So, of course, we can clearly say here and there an actual violation, right? An actual violation of the Capitol and an actual violation of our sacred chambers of American governance was encouraged by this president and by his followers. But that's a whole different conversation to get into. The second time that we use and as you can see, these are used very, very sparingly. This Alien and Sedition Act is not used frequently. But the second time that it was used was in World War I, when German immigrants ended up being registered as enemy aliens, and some were even detained, of course, because of the war. And then during World War II, which they used to justify the internment of Japanese, German, and Italian immigrants. Now, obviously, we know that it's obviously a little bit of an issue because we know what happened specifically to the Japanese was brutal. It was, in many ways, it was racist. And there were even Japanese that were serving in the military whose families were still being treated with suspicions because of the war. Now, this is the only surviving alien and sedition law. And a lot of critics are calling it a legal time bomb because it hands unchecked power to the president of the United States, which, of course, we're seeing Donald Trump completely and totally exploit. Now, this law, of course, was born out of fear. It was born out of fear of foreigners, spies, losing power. And now over 200 years later, this president is trying to use it again, but for a more sinister purpose. And so what we're seeing right now is the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals saying, no, you're not allowed to do this. We're not going to allow you to take this law and use a novel interpretation of it to get your way. So, of course, the Trump administration will probably try to appeal and go their routes where that's concerned. But this is the current update that we have where this law is concerned. Okay, so I want to take us now to this second part of the show here. Of course, the Trump administration is in a lawsuit right now with Harvard, and they threatened to remove federal funding, $2.6 billion worth of funding for that matter, unless they shut down their DEI programs. And of course, they said that they were citing these cuts under anti-Semitism concerns. But the court just today ruled it as a political retaliation. So Judge Allison Burroughs went ahead and restored their federal research funding. The context of this is that Harvard receives around 10% of all of NIH university grants, and the loss of funds was endangering work on cancer, artificial intelligence, and climate research. And the judge called the move today a mind-boggling misuse of power. So the problem with this is that when you are taking ideological viewpoints, or when you're setting ideological viewpoints and then basically penalizing or punishing a university under the guise of anti-Semitism or under the guise of DEI, but really what it is because of the fact that you don't like the way that a particular university runs their political programming, the way that they are essentially structured. I know Trump has called them a liberal university, a left university, right? Radical left, as he always talks about. The problem with this is when you begin to use the federal arm of the government to restrict universities from not only having their own perspectives, their own slants, but at the same time, you're restricting funding that can actually help people because of political or politically ideological disagreements. And so the conversation here is very, it very much parallels and is in a little bit of a way synoptic with how Trump has treated PBS and NPR by defunding them. And of course, that was provided in the big, beautiful, bloated, disgusting bill. So science and medicine, it's introducing the conversation. Should science and medicine be shielded from political disagreements and ideological disputes? Personally, I believe that it should be done. But if we're being honest, this was not about anti-Semitism. This was not even about DEI. This is about silencing critics and getting in between people that disagree with you. And what I love that the judge did in this situation is said, hey, listen, you can keep that political BS on television and on Capitol Hill and in some sort of back and forths on Twitter, but you're not going to bring Twitter and TikTok and true social back and forths into the fray and play politics with cancer research and health research that actually is saving people's lives. So there's already a $500 million lawsuit that's happening. We'll see what happens if they decide to rule in their favor where that's concerned. But clearly this is a legal victory, and it just goes to show you that right now, if one thing the founding fathers were right about was setting up all these different courts to check the powers of the president, of Congress, and of the judiciary. Of course, they're part of the judiciary, but the Supreme Court is not showing a spine. And right here, we're seeing that these courts are actually doing their job and upholding the rule of law. Okay, so I want to chat with y'all very, very quickly about this, but it's extremely important. And what we'll do next week, we'll talk a little bit more about tariffs, the illegal tariffs that a judge basically essentially ruled that a lot of Trump's tariffs are illegal because they need Congress essentially to be backing them and not just issued by executive order. So we'll talk about that. What I want to talk to y'all about very, very briefly is this Epstein files drop that occurred today. So today, there was on Capitol Hill, several of the survivors of the whole Epstein debacle that has occurred. And if you haven't heard about it, go do some research on it. But essentially, Jeffrey Epstein had a private island. And of course, he was sex trafficking girls and women to this island that would essentially serve different clients. Now, of course, the White House is saying this is a hoax, but there's tons of documented information to prove the opposite. And even Trump himself utilized in his first and second political campaigns, and I believe even third, utilized the Trump or utilized the Epstein narrative to basically say that Democrats were hiding something and that he would uncover what was going on. Well, of course, in typical Trump fashion, fast forward to 2025, he has been elected president for a second time. And now he's saying it's all a hoax. It's a Democrat hoax. We've talked about this before. Before I play you a couple of videos here of not only the survivors, but Trump himself talking about this, I just want to give you a little bit of context, okay? So today, which I'm assuming this is probably because they knew the survivors had planned a press conference. Today, the House Oversight Committee released 33,295 pages of Epstein-related files. And this includes flight logs from 2000 to 2014 and what they say is surveillance video from the night of Epstein's death. Now, 97% of this is already public, so it kind of feels like it's just ceremonial because of what's going on. But the new documents do add some important details. This new video debunks missing footage claims. It clearly shows camera rollover. And of course, there are survivors saying this is not a hoax from Capitol Hill today. And they're pushing for this bill to pass in the House and the Senate called the Epstein Files Transparency Act. And so what I want to do is show you, we can obviously talk a lot about this. We know that this bigger story here is the systematic protection of elites from responsibility for committing crimes. Of course, we know that drip feeding is what it's being called. By releasing this slowly and redacting and covering things up, it undermines, more importantly, public trust. But what's happening is the secrecy related to this matter is now breeding conspiracy. And in a situation where, of course, we know there could be more, honesty, and there could be more direct accountability for what's happened, it leads us to believe that there is more involvement with this particular government and administration than maybe was either previously thought or that has been outwardly and directly stated beyond just supposition and potential connection. So what I want to do in the short period of time that we have left is play you these videos so that you can hear it from the survivors themselves, and then I'll play you the response of the president as well. So give me 1 second. We're going to go ahead. I'll play you this first video here, and then you let me know what you think. Okay. Here we go.
Hi there, my name is Lisa Phillips, and I'm the host of a award-nominated podcast called From Now On, a platform supporting survivors. I want to thank all of my survivor sisters who came before me today. I'll be very short. In the year 2000, I was taken to Jeffrey Epstein's island while on a photo shoot on a nearby island. Who I saw and what I experienced there was a glimpse into a very dark and disturbing world. For years after, I tried to avoid Jeffrey, but he had introduced me to Katie Ford, the owner of the Ford Modeling Agency. Epstein.
So this just goes to show you how up the chain this is and how involved this has been. And there's been a lot of talk about, involvements with trafficking and other things. But this just goes to show you people that are saying this is a hoax. Why would these women get up here? They all have been talking about this. They're risking their lives, risking their, in some ways, credibility. That's crazy that we even have to say that, to put this out here, and they've been saying the same thing for years. But it's a hoax. Let's keep watching.
His reach went to the very top of fashion, arts, and entertainment. This did not just happen to underage girls in Florida. In New York City, hundreds of young, ambitious women were abused by him. Epstein was not just a serial predator, he was an international human trafficker.
Okay, so that is of course a video here, and of course we'll wait till this comes back up. But that was a video from Lisa Phillips, who was talking about her experience. What I now want to play you very, very quickly is another one of these videos from another Epstein survivor, so that you can see for yourself what I'm
And to be clear, the only motive for opposing this bill would be to conceal wrongdoing. You have a choice. Stand with the truth, or with the lies that have protected predators for decades.
This is
okay. So then
I was minor victim one.
And then this is another survivor as well.
Federal indictment of Jeffrey Epstein in New York in 2019. I was one of dozens of girls that I personally know who were forced into Jeffrey's mansion on 9 East 71 Street in New York City when we were just kids. Today is the first time that I ever speak publicly about what happened to me. I never thought that I would find myself here. The only reason that I am here is because it feels like the people who matter in this country finally care about what we have to say. As an immigrant from Brazil, I feel empowered knowing that the little girl struggling to get by at 14 and 15 years old finally has a voice. For the first time, I feel like I matter as an American. I was only 14 years old when I met Jeffrey. It was the summer of high school. I was working 3 jobs to try to support my mom and my sister when a friend of mine in the neighborhood told me that I could make $300 to give an older guy a massage. It went from a dream job to the worst nightmare. My therapist says that my brain is just trying to protect itself, but it's so hard to begin to heal knowing that there are people out there who know more about my abuse than I do. They have documents with my name on them that were confiscated from Jeffrey Epstein's house and could help me put the pieces of my own life back together.
This is absolutely disgusting and atrocious. And the fact that these women have to get up here and do this without having support from their own government when this happened is even worse. I will go ahead and play the rest of this, and then I'll go ahead and
I am no
Go
longer
ahead.
weak. I am no longer powerless. And I'm no longer alone. And with your vote, neither will the next generation be. President Trump, you have so much influence and power in this situation. Please use that influence and power to help us. Because we need it now, and this country needs it now.
And of course, that was their statement to the president, basically saying, hey, be on our side where this issue is concerned. This is Donald Trump's response to these women.
President, right now, there have been survivors of Jeffrey Epstein speaking at a press conference on Capitol Hill. They're calling for these case files, these documents to be released. Is the Justice Department protecting any friends or donors, sir?
So this is a Democrat hoax that never ends. You know, it reminds me a little of the Kennedy situation. We gave him everything over and over again, more and more and more. And
There's no comparison to this in the Kennedy situation whatsoever.
nobody's ever satisfied. From what I understand, I could check, but from what I understand, thousands of pages of documents have been given. But it's really a Democrat hoax because they're trying to get people to talk about something that's totally irrelevant to the success that we've had as a nation since I've been president.
Okay, so I think you've had enough, and I've had enough as well. At the end of the day, if it's totally irrelevant, and if this is not that big of a deal, why are files being redacted? Why is it taking forever? And an issue that you rode into the White House on the first time around, an issue that you've talked about since then, why not just settle it once and for all? These are real people's lives who were once kids. And I just got to say this to all the MAGA people out there, or MAGA people, whatever you want to call it. You've built your entire identity and political ideology and mission on several things, but child pedophilia and being anti-child pedophilia is one of those things. Where do you draw the line? Because for all of these women that were getting up here and saying this has happened to them, and there's proof and there's documentation and there's evidence about what's occurring, and there are people that we know for a fact are victims of this. We've seen it. How can you still support and parrot the words and ideologies of a president who seeks to minimize their pain to protect himself and his friends? If that is you today, and if that is your ideology, and if you can't wake up and smell what's going on, see what's going on, you're in a cult. And it's shameful and disgusting that instead of calling out the person that you supported and voted for and the people that are enabling him to cover up this situation, instead of calling that out, if you hide behind that, you're no better than the people that committed these atrocities. And that's just the God honest truth. Look, that's all the time that I have for today. If you would like to comment in about any of the things that we've talked about today, or just give any of your perspective or share anything that you would love to hear on the podcast, go ahead and reach out to me. You can go ahead and subscribe here and leave us a comment, as well as sharing this with a friend. And you can go ahead and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at _FullCirclePod on Instagram and at FullCirclePod on TikTok. Look, that's all the time that I have for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. And as I always say, have a great one from your favorite brother. We'll see y'all next time. Peace.